Hello everybody. This is Torah portion is Parshas Tetzaveh. Now we know there's a mitzvah in the Torah not to wear Shatnez. That means there's a mitzvah not to wear clothing that has a mixture of wool and linen fabrics. What is the reason behind this mitzvah? This is classically known as one of the chukim, one of the mysterious mitzvahs, and the Torah doesn't give the reasons for this, but the commentaries try to posit certain lessons behind them. So the Bechar Shar says, do you know the reason why we're not supposed to wear wool and linen? Because in this week's Torah portion we find that the clothing of the Kohanim contains Shatnez, contains mixtures of wool and linen, contains bads, and contains tcheles and argamon. They are mixtures of wool and linen. And he writes, his time he says, that just as if it's improper for a commoner to use a scepter of a king or an important official, similarly it would be improper for a regular person to wear Shatnez, which is basically the clothing of the Kohanim. That's what he writes. But there are other reasons that are given behind the mitzvah Shatnez. I would like to explore these reasons. The Rikanti writes, he says that wool and linen are basically reminiscent of wool comes from sheep and linen comes from flax. And sheep and flax are actually reminiscent of the very first fratricide, the very first murder of a brother. We know that the Torah discusses that Cain and Abel, Cain and Hevel, both brought offerings. Cain brought an offering of flax to God, and Hevel brought an offering of sheep to God. And Hashem accepted Hevel's offering, which is done out of a greater feeling of graciousness and devotion to Hashem. And Cain became very, very jealous of Hevel. That jealousy led him to murder Hevel. So the Rikanti writes that wool and linen are reminiscent of this initial encounter between flax and sheep, and therefore we're told that to remember the lessons of what happened the last time flax and sheep came together, and that led to this great rivalry and great jealousy between two brothers, and that eventually led to the first murder. And the first murder actually opened the Pandora's box of all the rest of the murders in history, because the first time something is done makes it permissible for the rest of time, so to speak. If something is never ever done, if something is totally taboo, it's hard to break the first breach. But once there's a breach, it's easier for it to be done in the future. So therefore that rivalry, that jealousy caused the rest of the murders in history. That's what the Rikanti writes. The Sifranu writes, he says that before we accepted the Torah, the Jewish people's clothing were made out of wool and linen. We were once pagans, and we would wear clothing of Shatnez. And therefore, once we got the Torah, to express that we are a new people, we're no longer going to wear our old clothing. We want to abandon our way of life. We're going to abandon our way of dressing before we accepted the Torah. And that's what the Sifranu writes. So we have three basic reasons. Number one, this is the clothing of the Kohanim. Number two, this is reminiscence of the first jealousy, the first rivalry between brothers. And we're to learn the danger of jealousy, because it can lead to great conflict. And number three, the idea of trying to avoid the clothing of our pagan ways. And as on an individual level, when we try to become better people, we resolve to become new people. We try to avoid the practices of our past. I'd like to share with you a beautiful story. Rabbi Yuri Zilber was a mathematician living under the communist rule in the USSR, and he was able to become a great Torah scholar, even under the shadow of the Kremlin. And eventually he was able to emigrate. He was able to escape to Israel, and he would keep returning to surreptitiously teach Torah to Jews in Moscow and throughout Russia. So he would teach Torah. Eventually he wasn't able to come back for many, many years because he was trying to avoid the scrutiny of the authorities. But eventually, after a long hiatus, he came back to Russia to teach Torah once again. And he was approached by a Russian man wearing tattered clothing. It was clear that he was very poor, and he came with a beautiful, brand new, very heavy winter coat. And he said, Reb Yuri, Reb Yitzchak, I'm so happy you're here. I bought this coat 7 years ago, and I've been waiting every day, waiting for you to come back so you could check my clothing for Shatnez. And I've been waiting now for 7 years. Would you kindly check my coat for Shatnez? And Yuri looked at him. And it was clear that he really could have used his coats. But he was astonished at this man's mysterious nefesh. That as much as he could have used it, as much as he couldn't afford another one, as much as he really could have used this winter coat, he avoided wearing it because he was so devoted to the mitzvah of not wearing Shatnez. The lesson of the story is it transcends merely the mitzvah of Shatnez, but it teaches us the devotion that this Jew, the simple Jew, had living under the oppression of communism. The devotion that he had to be Moshe Nefesh, to be so committed to the Torah, and that should be an inspiration for all of us. So we all learn these lessons from these mitzvahs, and let's have a very wonderful Shabbos.